Hello and good evening, class, and welcome to week 6. How you guys doing this week? I'm here back to my normal setup, trying to improve the audio. That's why I have the mic in front of me, but I'm glad I'm kind of back to my kind of a normal video setup here to kind of give you more kind of a directed and more kind of face-to-face video style here for our lecture video here. So what I want to do tonight is I want to kind of talk about what you guys are working on in week 6. I am doing this video a couple days later than I would like to, just based on my schedule. But I think this is good because, like I said, like I mentioned in my last video, I don't want you guys to wait for my lecture videos to work on this week's content. I'm expecting you guys to go in, do the reading, watch the videos that I have already in the required reading videos, or any web articles that I have. Also review the handouts and try to get started on the exercise. Okay. Now remember, the exercises are due normally, unless I give an extension for those, are due on Thursday. Okay. So I want to make sure that you guys are working on the exercise. And then please, for that first submission on Thursday, don't be afraid. If, like I said, if you haven't completed the whole exercise for that week, that's fine. Post what you have completed, even if it's partially completed. Okay. So I want to make sure that you're starting posting your work by Thursday, even if it's not 100%, even if it's only about halfway done, because then we can start to take a look at it and start to have conversations about it and to get feedback on it. And I'm actually going to take a look at a couple of yours that are posted already tonight and to kind of give you some notes on it, because that's also one thing I'd like to do with these videos, which as we're getting closer to working on Project A, which we will be next week, starting to really think about that first one-page website that you guys are going to be creating. We're definitely going to be doing more work in progress critiques around the projects, because that's going to be an important time for you to get feedback and to know what you have to improve or to continue to keep working on. So we will be doing more of these critiques through the discussion boards, and also be doing more video reviews of the work that you're producing regarding to the project. But let me kind of get into here. I want to kind of clarify a couple things about this week, about the content, what you guys are learning about. Also to answer any questions, and usually I like to do kind of a short little demo to kind of walk you through a couple things of how that may be regarding to the exercise, but also it may not be. But just some things to maybe kind of help you clarify a couple questions that you may have as you guys are learning about the content. So this week in week 6, what you guys are learning about is you're learning about how CSS positioning works. Learning about how to lay out your web pages with cascading style sheets. And this is, like I mentioned to you in previous week, and what also in my announcement this week. This can be a challenging time. When you kind of take a step for learning about the basics of HTML, learning about the basics of structure, learning a little bit about CSS, just understanding how to format the page and elements on the page. But then once you go about laying out the page and doing that with CSS, it can be a bit of a challenge. It can be a little bit of a struggle. And I think I see a lot of the students as they come to this point, especially as you then will start working on that first website for Project A, it can be a bit of a challenge. Okay, so I want to encourage you guys this week, don't get too deterred. Just keep trying it. Keep trying different ways to work with your HTML and your CSS and the combination of the two to work out your layouts that you're trying to implement. And this week you're implementing just a basic kind of photo gallery layout. Because what I wanted to really encourage you guys with is, even though this is a very challenging part, once you kind of get a good grasp of understanding how to do just basic layout with CSS, then it actually becomes a lot easier. Okay, but I know it can be a challenge just learning how to create the boxes on the page and learning how to position them with floating them or putting them in a grid format, understanding how to space them out with margin, and just understanding basically how to get the layout to work just by using HTML tags and also CSS. But once you do that, it does become a lot easier. Okay, because what also this is the really important part of learning about casting and style sheets, because this is what CSS is made for. Where HTML, that's about structuring your content. That's about organizing your content on the HTML web page. But then how you present your content, how you do that from a design perspective, or the aesthetics of the page, that is really all about CSS. CSS is all about the presentation. HTML is all about the organization and the structure of the page. Okay, so for you as designers, and then getting into actually designing and implementing your designs that you have illustrated in either Photoshop or Illustrator or sketched out in your head or on paper, you have to use HTML and CSS to actually illustrate your design on a web page. And then as a web designer, it's just a skill that you need to develop. That's why web design, I do believe, it's a much harder skill to learn than rather print design, because you have this whole technology of the web browser to kind of deal with and understand. You need to understand the language that it knows how to read in order to how to build pages. So like I said, I want to just give you some words of encouragement because I know this can be a challenging part of the course, especially this week and then going into next week with working on your first project. But once you get through this, it definitely becomes a lot easier. And just want to encourage you with that. All right, so this week, like I said, you're learning about CSS positioning. You're also learning about the difference between absolute and relatives, and I'll kind of talk briefly about that in my short demonstration. You're also learning about floats and positioning of boxes on the page, and this kind of builds on to what you learned about last week. And last week is all about learning how to structure your content into boxes, and then to start to style those boxes with CSS. You guys learned about that with the resume page exercise, learning how to kind of structure your page into sections, into boxes, because that's a key first step. Understanding to look at your content in regarding to containers or boxes that you put your content into, because then once they're inside the content, then you can start to lay them out and start to position them with CSS. Okay, so you just have to understand the first step, and then you can build on it what you're going to be doing this week and understanding how to actually place those boxes or position the boxes on the page. You're also be learning about how to optimize images in Photoshop. Okay, I also want you guys to kind of try opening up some large images inside of Photoshop and learning how to optimize. Now, a lot of the content from Photoshop and Illustrator you'll find in this course. I do not, like I said, this course isn't about how to design in Photoshop or how to design in Illustrator. That's the material you guys I'm expected to have learned in the computer graphics course. What I'm going to be doing is kind of pointing out a few things about those design tools, about using Photoshop or Illustrator, because as web designers, you should really pay attention to and really make note of. And one thing I want you to do this week is just learning how to optimize images and in different image formats you can use to display images on a web page. So you want to make sure you kind of practice those with maybe selecting some large photos for your photo gallery, and then try to optimize those, bring them down in size, because you need to, when you go about putting those images into a web page, they have to be optimized. And that is a step you have to go through. So talking about that a little bit. And then also you'll be learning how to insert images into a page using either the image tag or using background elements of CSS, okay? Which are very kind of two key ways to put images into a page, okay? So that's the main things we're learning about this week. Now, in the required reading of videos, like I said, you're reading about chapters, kind of jumping around the book a little bit, because like I said, I didn't, wanted to kind of, before we kind of jumped in, because I wanted to kind of to read more about the CSS. But now we need to kind of jump back and learn about images. That's in chapter 5, the 15, and 16. Learning about images along with doing CSS layouts. So please make sure you read that. A couple of the good videos I found about doing and kind of illustrating the difference between absolute and relative positioning, and also how to export your images out in Photoshop, which are both things I'm going to talk about briefly tonight. But like I said, I put these videos inside this folder because I do think that these are good videos that illustrate the concepts that you're reading about in the book, because I'm expecting you guys to read the book first. And then these videos will help try to illustrate some of those concepts that you are learning about from the book. And then I'm here to kind of fill in the gaps here to answer some of your questions and to give you guys some feedback. All right, so let me go down to also the handouts folder. A couple things I have in the handouts folder. Now, when you start learning about CSS, and one of the great examples to kind of see the power of CSS, especially regarding to layout, is to take a look at the CSS Zen Garden. See, I have that in the handouts folder because I want you guys to take a look at the site and to see just basically, how the site kind of works. And the way the site is designed is actually it is an older site. It's actually been around for a pretty long time, but it's pretty much stayed the same, where the purpose of the site is to have one piece of content on the page, like having all the text the same on the page, having the HTML structure the same on the page, but having drastically different designs. So if I would kind of click through some of these designs on the CSS Zen Garden page, you'll see that the design is drastically different between these designs I'm clicking through. But as you take a close look at the content, like the copy, the text on the page, it's exactly the same. And then if you actually inspect the page, or if you download the HTML from the site here, you actually will see that the content stays exactly the same. Like the HTML tags, nothing has changed about those. So what CSS Zen Garden illustrates is that you can take pretty much the same HTML. The HTML doesn't really matter in regards to presentation. It just matters about how the content is structured. But then you can put multiple style sheets on top of it and change the design drastically. That's the power of CSS, where if you can separate your design from a structure and then a view perspective, how it's going to be displayed, and you only treat the display part of your page as from CSS point of view, then it's great, because then you could just, if you want to redesign your site, you don't really have to change the HTML, you just change the CSS. So that's the ideal situation, which when you work in a lot of projects, you probably will have to modify the HTML because you'll be changing the content. But this CSS Zen Garden is a great example of how if you wanted to change the design of a site, you don't need to change the HTML. You just change the CSS that's controlling the display of the design of the page, right? So I want you guys to take a look at some of these examples. There's some good examples too of good design too that are kind of for good inspiration, but it's a really kind of great way to really see the power of CSS, to really understand that. And I know that, taking a look at that, you may not understand maybe some of the CSS it's using or some of the HTML because it is doing some advanced things, especially when with the CSS part of it. But I want you to it's a good illustration of the power of CSS and why, as a web designer, CSS is such a necessary and important tool to learn, because that is the way that you implement your designs in your web pages, is by using cascading style sheets. All right, so I want you guys to take a look at that this week. And then this week's exercise is a photo gallery. Okay, now this is exercise I actually do in the advanced website design class too, but we add a little bit more to it. We make it a little bit more interactive, because you guys are probably used to seeing, when you go to a photo gallery page, probably used to seeing like, the nice little hover effects or interactive features that a modern photo gallery can give. We're not going to be doing that at all today. Really, the purpose of the photo gallery this week is just to understand how the layout works. Because a photo gallery, if you pretty much between all the sites, is basically just a grid of photos. It's like a presentation of photos in a grid format where you have rows and columns, or you just have boxes that are lined next to each other. So kind of practicing layout on a web page using a photo gallery is a really kind of good starting point, because it allows you to practice with a minimal amount of content. You're just working with images. You're just working with images inside of boxes. But then you're working with the layout of those images and those boxes on the page and getting it to work well together. Okay, so I think it's kind of a really good step, because you can just stay focused on just the images, just the boxes, getting that grid working, and then also thinking about how, if I want to click on that image, let me see a full view of the image, how does that work? Okay, so you'll be practicing with implementing the content that you're learning about in chapters 5, 15, and 16 about images and about CSS layout. You'll be implementing that with the photo gallery page. So before I go into my example, which I will talk about, let me kind of just take a look at a couple of your submissions so far on photo gallery page, right? So I only have a couple. Like I said, I'm trying to really encourage you guys, do not be afraid to make that first submission. Even if, let's say, if you got your image displayed on a box on the page and maybe you got 2 images and you're having trouble getting the third image to align right, but you're afraid to post it, like I said, post that first example. Post the first, because you do need to make that first post by Thursday. But then I'm expecting you guys to improve your discussion posts through the rest of the week and into the weekend. Okay, so you want to try to post early as possible, even if it's just a very early version, and then just maybe add to the post what you've had issues with, and then add additional updates to the exact same post. You can just reply to your own thread, and then you can just post updates. So it's a great way to have an ongoing discussion about what you're working on. But let me take a couple of your examples here, since we have 2 here. We have Kyle and Miranda's. Look at the photo gallery here. Notice Kyle did a pretty good job. Kind of like how he actually really did some good work on the styling. Let's see if he clicks on these images. The images aren't clicked on, but he does have the text link. Actually, he gave a title for each of his images. But he's pretty much implementing the way that I'm asking you guys to work on. To have a photo gallery of at least 6. Actually, what did I have here? Let me make sure I have the correct requirements for that here. Did I ask for 6 or 9? I believe it was 9, right? Just double check that real quick. Yeah, about 9 photos, about 2 rows, 3 by 3 of 9 photos. So Kyle implemented it correctly by having basically 3 rows, 3 columns, 9 images total. He's not clicking, he doesn't make the link on the image, but he does provide a title or a name for the image, and then that is actually a link that links to the image. Now, the only thing I will talk about maybe is just take a look at this. I wonder if it's the exact same image. Hoping the images, well, he did resize the image. I was hoping the image to be a little bit larger, but I think it actually works. Yeah, some of the images are larger. Probably that was just the one image I was viewing. Yeah, most of the images are larger. That kind of works. Okay. But I think, Kyle, you did a really good job of kind of playing with the CSS. I see you playing with, like, your boxes have rounded corners, so you're playing with like a border radius probably. Also like a border, like a dotted border you're doing on the header. The only thing I'd probably also comment, it'd be kind of nice if the content was kind of centered in a container. The kind of on the page, I think it's basically aligned to the left. All right, so everything, so it could be a little, ooh, actually I like how you actually probably did the floats really good. See how kind of it's responsive? So that's great. Actually, it's good. So I think you could just add a little bit more to this by putting this in a container that'll float this box of images in the middle of the page. I think you did a pretty good job. All right, let's take a look at. Let's take a look. I think it was Miranda. Let's see what she. Yep, Miranda. Let's take a look and see how far you got. So you're saying you have problems. This is a good example. All right, so you say you have problems with the link. Before I put all documents, files, they all work, but it brought me to larger pictures. Now I click on the link and nothing happens. Does anyone know what happened? Well, let me see if I know what happened. Let me take a look at this. Oh, you did a pretty good job just by getting the image displayed there. But you said you have a problem with actually viewing the images. Okay, so I'm thinking. Actually, I'd like let me just talk about. You're very, very similar to the way that Kyle worked, where you basically did a really good job of presenting the images. You're playing with its border colors, playing with some header styles to kind of to style that. You have your grid of photos working really, really good. It's not floating in the center of the page with a container, but it is responsive, so that's really great. So all the images are floating appropriately next to each other, and I kind of like the nice even margins in between. That's nice. It's really, really good. But you said you have an issue with linking to the image. That's good. So we'll talk about that tonight. And so I'm thinking, let me just inspect your page. I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to view the page source. Let's see how you're working with the code here. All right, so it looks like you're linking to, okay, so you just don't have the links correct. Now, I'm not sure, did you make a web page for each image, which is one way to do it. I didn't require that, so it looks like, I'm going to zoom up into this. It looks like what you're trying to do is to have a dedicated page that's linked off your desktop, that you have 1, 2, 3, HTML. So it looks like you have a dedicated page for each image, that's perfectly the way to do it. If you want to have a dedicated page for each image that you then link to that page, that'll work. So if that's what you're doing, the only thing I can see that you probably have an issue with is that when you uploaded it, your URL, your href attribute, you don't need this file : / All you really need is if that web page is right next to your index file, like the page that actually holds the photo gallery, you just need to just reference that HTML file. So you just say 1.html. If it's in another folder, like maybe you'd have like a folder of pages or image pages or gallery pages or gallery. If you have a folder name, you say the folder name / the file name that you're actually trying to view inside the browser. So for this, the example I'm going to go over, I'll show you guys how to link to different images. I'm just going to link directly to the image, but I think what you're trying to do is you may have a dedicated page for each image, which that's one way to do it, and that's totally great. Because you actually could have some control of how that image is displayed, and you can do some CSS directly on that page. It's a little bit more work, so that's why I didn't ask everybody to do that. But that's one great approach, right? But I think the reason why you're having trouble linking to that image or linking to that page for that image is that you should just reference just the file name. Because right now what it's doing is looking at, basically, it's like what's called hard coding. You've written exactly where that image is located on your computer, and when you upload it up to the NC web space, like onto the internet, the website doesn't know anything. The NC web space doesn't know, or the browser doesn't know anything about your desktop. So you have to just keep it simple. Like when you use that relative link that we've talked about in the previous weeks, where you just reference the folder, file, or just the file name, and that's really all you need to list. And you can do this both on desktop and when you upload it online. I recommend just use relative links. Like don't link to the putting that full directory on your computer, because that's going to mess it up when you upload it up to the NC web space. So if you can clarify that, I think then you are in a good spot. I think the way that you did everything else good. You're using the figure tag, which is good. You're using figure caption, which is good. So you're using some good approaches here for that. You're putting inside the boxes. So you're doing a pretty good job. So I think that is a good. Like I think you're on track. The only thing you're just missing is just getting the links working. All right, that's good. Good job, Miranda and Kyle, for posting what you have so far. I think that's good. So, like I said, I want to encourage everybody else. Like I said, even if you didn't get that far, please keep trying to post as early as possible. That's the point of the discussion boards. And actually, and I may do this more too throughout the semester. Depends on how we're working on the exercises. Because actually, I kind of liked giving you comments and commenting on the photo gallery and kind of seeing where you guys are at, because that allows me to kind of give you some kind of face-to-face feedback and to give you some suggestions on what you should work on to help you conclude the exercise. All right, so let me kind of go into a quick little demo here. To kind of go over a couple things I want you guys to think about. the first thing I want you to do before I even get to the HTML and CSS, let me just briefly talk about Photoshop. Because like I said, I'm expecting you guys coming into this course have a good understanding of Photoshop or Illustrator. That's what you guys learned about in the computer graphics class. So I'm not expecting you to, like I said, I don't go through how to use Photoshop, how to design, layout specifically in Photoshop. Now, there will be some times, especially as we get farther a little bit later in the course, I will be going over some kind of techniques and some methods to use, especially if you're going to be creating some mock-ups in Photoshop or Illustrator. Some things that it's useful to know how to do in Photoshop regarding to lay out your page first, to illustrate, to create like what's called a static mock-up, which is basically your design that you're going to be implementing, but then you're going to then take that to HTML and CSS and to actually make it into a working web page. Also probably talk briefly about Adobe XD, which is actually a new application that we spend a lot more time with in the advanced website design class, creating interactive mockups. But what I expect you guys to use Photoshop Illustrator for is really just for creating some small images or small elements that you would then implement into your web page. So let me just talk about basically about image sizes and image formats. So what I want you guys to do this week is to try to find a set of 9 images that you can then optimize and then display inside of a photo gallery. Because doing the image optimization process is a very, very important step. Now, one thing you may want to do is you probably may want to go in and recrop your photos into a specific crop format. Like you may want to do like you want to kind of crop them all in the same, dimensions. You may want to do like a 16:9 and arrange like you're using your crop tool and be able to crop it. That's one way to maybe initialize or maybe to initially do some of the optimizations. Try to figure out if you're going to be doing a photo gallery, you may want to crop each one of your images to have the same, not exactly the same size, but just have the same dimensions, so that when you open it up into a new window, or maybe once you get a little bit farther, more advanced, and try to put it into an overlay, it'll all be the exact same size. Also, is very helpful when you're putting it inside of a box and constraining that image inside the box. It also is a little bit easier if all of them had the same dimensions, but that's not a requirement. So I'm not expecting you guys to do that. But one thing I do want you to understand how to do is to understand the image size and what format you could save it out as. So if you go up to the image size property box here and take a look at that, you want to take a look at a couple things. So I specifically searched for a couple images I knew were pretty large, so you can understand a couple things. So the width and height, like I said, is not horrible for like a really large image. It's about over 2,000 pixels, but I do recommend trying to keep your images between, let's say if you're going to be doing a large image that's going to be displayed on, let's say, as part of a photograph, try to keep them between 1,000 to 2,000 pixels, right? Maybe like 1,500 or 1,200. That's kind of a good size, because that'll automatically reduce the size, the file size of your image. And that's really what you want to get to, because when you deal with web pages and deal with online images, you have to try to optimize your images and try to keep the file size down to a relatively manageable size. Now, you guys are kind of in the kind of a fast internet days, probably about 10 to 15 years ago, before everybody had high-speed cable or fiber internet access, before we all had fast internet connections. File size was really, really important. Like you had to make sure that your file sizes were around like 50K or like 75K or under 100K, because your web pages took a while to load, because your web page had to load in each individual image one at a time to display the page. Now that still happens, but it happens much faster now because download speeds of it improves so much, but you still have to be concerned about. And also, I should also note too, you still have image download speeds that could be relatively small when you're on a mobile device too. And everybody's experienced this, where like you're out and out doing something and you do not have a Wi-Fi connection. You may have like a 4G or an LTE or maybe even less, and you could see just based on the cell phone connection could really keep your web pages you're trying to view really could take a while. And so we should all be thinking about it nowadays as web designers. We need to be thinking about how our pages load on mobile devices. So optimizing images is still a really important thing for mobile devices, because you could run in very often situations where you don't have a lot of high-speed download available to you. So you have to make sure that the pages that you're developing or you're designing can be downloaded fast over slow connection. So that's why I recommend to try to keep your file size as low as much as possible, because it's important. But so the size is the first step. If you can optimize the width and height and keep that manageable, like you definitely do not want to have like say you take a photograph with like a DSLR and it comes out with a high megapixel, and you come up with like a 6,000 wide or 8,000 wide pixel photo, you don't want to have that. So that's the worst thing you can do. You do not want to have a photo you just took from your camera, or even scanned it from a scanner. You want to make sure that you optimize that image. Decrease the file size. You do not need to display an image that's basically 4,000 or 6 or 8,000 pixels on a computer screen. Now, maybe in the future, when speed's even getting even faster, and then screen density and sizes of their displays get to be more precise, which that may happen, then maybe it'll be fine. But for now, you want to always anticipate, the image is going to be viewed on a smaller device on the scale, and you want to make sure you downsize that down to, like I said, around 2,000, preferably under 2,000. That'll be like one of the first steps you do. The other thing you should look to do is the resolution. So maybe you guys are familiar with doing the like a DPI setting. When you guys worked in computer graphics class, you guys printed stuff out, you guys probably dealt with a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. When you guys take the type and design course and you deal with just designing for primarily type layouts, you will be dealing with a resolution at 300 pixels per inch, because that is the default standard for printing, right? So a really high resolution of 300 is important for printing. Now for web, we don't need that. Now, since the advent of high resolution displays, like with the DPI, like when the newer Apple iPhones kind of came out, and they came out with the high resolution displays, like the Retina displays they call it. And when that happened, the resolution did increase, because previously the resolution was actually just 72 pixels per inch, and a lot of web graphics are still 72 pixels per inch. But now with high resolution monitors, like 4K monitors, high resolution phones, tablets, that what happens is that they actually are fitting more pixels per inch than they previously did. So what a good rule of thumb is, that what I do now for all of my images or graphics I do for online that are going to be viewed online, I try to do them at double the 72. So 144 or 150, that's kind of a good kind of starting point to kind of have like a higher resolution, and then kind of deal with the size. So when I would, let's say, go into optimize this image, this is a 300 pixels per inch image, the first thing I would do, even before messing with the width and height, I would just want to see, what is the width and height? Because Photoshop will tell you this. If I change this to 150, kind of cut that in half, then it immediately resizes my width down to 1256 by 707. So I'm actually already in a better place. So I have a higher pixels per inch, so my image, there's more pixels per inch inside my image, but then the width and height of my image is smaller. So you're kind of getting the benefits of like having a higher density image, but it's just a smaller size, which is good. Okay, so that's the first thing I would do. I would definitely reduce the resolution. Now, sometimes you may need to reduce the width and height even more. Maybe I don't need this to be 1200. Maybe I just want this to be 900. Well, I could set it there too. Okay, so you can see here that once you play with the resolution, then modify the width and height, it then starts to reduce the size. You can also see it up here. It says image size. Right now, before I even optimize it anymore, it's already about 1.3 megabytes. Before it was 10 megabytes. Okay, so when you're trying to save your images out, you should try to keep the file size below a megabyte, preferably around 500K or less. Actually, between 250, 300 to 500K, that's a really good kind of because you think that's just one image, and your web page may need to load many images at one time. So the smaller you can keep the file size down, the better. Okay, so I recommend doing that. But this is kind of a good. So let's say I wanted to kind of let me keep the back to 1200. So I think that's a kind of a good size for like a full size image if I'm going to be viewing this, but still 2.32 megabytes. So still larger than I want it to be. So the next step is, after resizing it, the next step is then I need to think about how am I going to optimize it. So in Photoshop, you have a couple options here. You just do file save as. Let me kind of do that. If you just do file save as, you can save it, and that's preferred way to save it out as a Photoshop file. It does give you a lot of different file types to use. Now, I recommend if you're saving images for the web, you should be using JPEG, PNG files, or you could also use bitmap files, BMP files. But I recommend if you're going to be saving out images like a photograph, use JPEGs, because it's a compression format. So it has a little bit of compression built into it, and that's just the way it's designed. If you are designing things that have, let's say, a transparent area, or you don't need them to be compressed, then a PNG works really good, because the PNGs are very, very similar in how many colors it can display, but the JPEG has compression built into the file format. PNG is designed for saving images in a more of a non-compression format, and also has a transparency built into it. So I'd recommend doing this too. You also have a GIF format, which the CompuServe GIF, which is that's good for saving images. That has a very kind of low color, like 256 colors. So like a low amount of colors it's using. So it's really good for like more flat graphics, simple graphics, like maybe for like buttons or for icons. GIFs are really good for that. Even though GIFs are really popular now for like displaying like animated GIFs on the internet. So you can do photos as GIFs, but you probably noticed it before. You see it, look at a photograph or an animated GIF on the internet. It's going to be definitely look a lot more pixelated and a lot more low res because it can't save as many colors as a PNG or a JPEG image. So you first need to figure out what is the file format that you want to save. And when you just do file save as in Photoshop, you can save as a JPEG. Right? So I can save as a JPEG, and it will give you this JPEG options box to control the compression. Okay, so if you just do file save as, it will say, okay, what do you want your quality size to be? So maybe I want it to be a little bit less, like 10 or 8. Also gives you some presets here, right? So you have high, medium, low. But you can see every time when I switch down when I change the settings here from high, medium, maximum, you'll see it'll give you a preview of the actual end result of the file size. So now if I just did high, I do recommend too when you're saving your images, if you can just start out with a base level of like 8, I think that actually works pretty well. And you can see by me just switching this to an 8 and about a 1200 pixel wide image, I already have this down to 273K. So that's just a really good size. If I go down to medium, I can get that down even more. But what you will see though, once you go from like high, medium, up to max, like up to between like high, medium, you will start to see more of a kind of fuzzy pixelation effect will happen. Because what happens is that when you try to optimize the image, especially a JPEG image, Photoshop is going to compress that image. It's going to start to take out color, little pixels where it can, and start to blend the pixels together. And the fuzziness is what start happening. You start seeing a bunch of kind of similar colors together in certain areas that you didn't see previously before that were kind of unique colors in certain pixels. So every time you compress or optimize, it kind of takes color information out and starts to blend, tries to do its best job to try to blend those areas that's taking out, and that causes that fuzziness that you're going to start seeing. Or like you also will see like a sort of like a wax or some sort of like a jelly type effect. We kind of have, it looks like the image is kind of smeared in some areas. That happens because it's being compressed. So you want to be careful about this. I recommend doing 8 for like the high setting, because high settings, between high and maximum, you will see a little bit of difference between the two. But if I could save, let's see, if I did maximum, that's like closer to 500K, but I almost cut it in half by doing high. It's almost worth it. Now, and also the best way to kind of test this out is just a little bit of trial and error. You're going to have to save the images out as one compression, take a look at it, see if you see that does it look pixelated, does it look fuzzy, you start seeing any issues with it? If not, then you're good to go. I think just kind of trying to save it out as a high setting would be kind of a good starting point. If you do, well, then maybe it's worth it to go up to the maximum. But like I said, just as a trial, if you start to kind of save this out as a low or medium, just do it just for test, just for the experience of seeing what the image looks like, because you will start seeing issues that the image isn't as sharp and it's more pixelated and more fuzzy in certain areas. So I would recommend saving it high, like 7 or 8 to like high setting, because I think that's a good balance between maintaining the quality, but still compressing the image and still making it smaller file size, so it's going to be faster to do. So that's just doing a save as inside of Photoshop. You could also do an export. So you have an option for a quick export as PNG. I would talk about PNG images a little bit later, especially for when we get into designing other areas of the page. But you see, when I did file save as and export as quick PNG, the whole purpose of that was it didn't give you any compression settings. And with the PNG, you don't have the same compression controls. Like we have that little slider, the control between like a low, medium, high, maximum settings. We don't have that with a PNG. And so if you have an image you quickly want to save, you don't really care about the file size because maybe you feel okay that it's small already, then you can just do export as quick PNG. And from a color standpoint, you have similar the amount of colors you can have between you can save all your photographs PNG and it would just be fine. So but to know that will be a slightly larger because it's not being compressed. But you also have an export or export as. What that'll give you a better export box. It gives you a little bit more control, because then what I can do is I can even see what this looks like between the different formats. Okay, so you have PNG, you have JPEG, you have GIF file, right? So you can see what it will look like between those different formats and how it'll be saved out, the file saves it'll be saved out, so you can kind of have a good understanding of what it will look like. Give you kind of a preview window. Also, you can also start to scale it too. You can change the width or height or specify a percentage to scale it down, so you can actually have a little bit more control over what the actual size is. Okay, you can actually do, like, you also see like this 1x, 2x, 3x. That's also good for saving images out for multiple resolutions, which when you get into more, let's say, mobile development or interactive design, where you're dealing with multiple devices and you want to be very particular about the multiplier that the image is being saved out as. We won't be getting that in too much in this class. That's another way you could also save it as, like, how at different scales for different sizes. But you can see in the format, it gives you the 4 formats that you can use. You have a PNG, JPEG, GIF, or an SVG file. Now the SVG, which we will talk about a little bit later, but it's more of what that's called as a vector format. So it's more of your, let's say if you design a logo inside of Illustrator, and then you want to display that logo, but you don't want to do it in a PNG or JPEG or GIF format, you can save it as an SVG file, and it works across all browsers. SVG files are great for displaying vector images, so images that you would has like vector information on it, like you'd have like your lines, your strokes, your fills, like everything you are designing in Illustrator. You could save that out as an SVG file, and the beautiful and good thing about that is that it's scalable. Like, you won't lose any quality because it'll scale up and down. Now, SVG files are not meant for photographs, which we're dealing with photographs this exercise. So you have the choice to say between a PNG, JPEG, or GIF file. But like I talked about, with a GIF file, you're going to have less colors. JPEG and PNG, you have the similar colors, but you also have the option under JPEG for the compression. Now, I want you to kind of, for this week, primarily play with the JPEG, because I want you to play with the quality settings to try to get your images for your photo gallery down to a relatively good size to use. Okay, so that's one thing I'd recommend first, is to downsize and to save out your images and to optimize them first inside of Photoshop. Okay. All right, so now let me talk about and get into some HTML and CSS. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of start with my similar CSS boxes folder that I started with last week. Now, what I also recommend you guys do, and this is what I want to see when you guys are working on your exercises, try to keep your images into a separate image folder. Okay, so we haven't worked with images up to this point in this class, but now that you're going to be dealing with images, you want to keep them into a separate folder just for your images. Okay, so either people, when they're making their folder for their images, either they call it IMG for short for images, or images. Just type the name of it. I usually just prefer images. But you want to, most importantly, you want to keep your images inside of a folder. The other thing too, I don't want to see your images outside a folder. Let me see if I can drag this out here. Let's see it. No. Dealing with the zooming in, zooming out, and the Mac here. Let me see if I can drag these out. Oh, well, let me do that in that view here. Let me do here. Over 2 windows here. Okay, so I want to show you, I do not want to see something like this. Right? So I don't want to see this. And this is actually, if you actually submit your project A or project B like this, where I see all of your web pages, your style sheet, and then all of your images in one directory, you're not using image directory, you will get points taken off, because this is not a good practice to do. When you're using, because usually websites have many images. It has so many images that it's kind of hard to keep track with. You want to keep those images separate from your HTML and separate from your style sheet, all right? And as we get to more advanced website design too, and dealing with multiple files, like multiple style sheets, multiple web HTML files, we want to even organize this even more and have additional subfolders. But when you're first starting off, the first thing you're going to have a lot of is images that you're going to be loading or using inside of your web page. So you want to make sure you have an image folder just for those images, right? So you want to make sure you create a new folder, call it images, and make sure each one of those images now are in the image folder. Okay. All right, so you want to make sure that it's all organized in the image folder, and then you can get started working with it here. Now, let me open up brackets now. So I'm trying to brackets. I know I've been having an issue with my videos and the green color turning out black. Still need to find a better theme that will work with creating these videos. So Please bear with me if you see some of my black type here for some of the color coding for the code. That just means that it's not coming out right in the video, but just know that just bear with me until I get a theme that kind of works better, or figure out the issue that I have with how this video is being created. All right, so let me kind of start off with, now I'm not going to do the full photo gallery page, because remember, like I mentioned previously, that when I'm going to be proposing these exercises to you, I'm going to be expecting you guys to try out this exercise without having me to follow through. And I don't want you to kind of follow exactly what I'm doing. So I want you guys to experiment, just like Kyle and Miranda did. They experiment. You know, I actually prefer that they did not follow me exactly, because I feel that's the best way you're going to learn. You need to try writing the code yourself, try to see what works, what doesn't work, and then just try to figure it out. I know it can be a challenge at first, especially if you're kind of trying to hit your head against a wall, but that's really the only way you're going to learn is to type the code. And honestly, I feel if you type the code without having to follow me exactly, I think you actually will start to learn a lot more about that. Okay, so let me get started here. What I want to talk about first is just doing a very basic establishing the grid, and I'm only going to do like 2 images here. I just really want to stay focused on, okay, how would I approach putting an image inside of a box that's going to hold one of my photos, and then how do I deal with positioning that photo next to another photo, and then how do I link to the larger photo? So I just want to go over that quickly. Like I said, I'm not going to do the whole photo gallery example here, because I want you guys to do that on your own. But let me just kind of get you started. For you guys still having issues with understanding how you should approach this, let me just talk about how I would start to structure some of the HTML and then start to link it with some CSS to get the display working. So first thing I would do on this page, I would definitely have, you know, a header, either a class or a header. Actually, let me actually switch this up a little bit here. Actually do what I'm thinking about here. It's a little bit better. Kind of like I said, I'm starting with an example I did last week. But it's better, you know, to use more of a semantic tag. So I'm going to start using those a little bit more with you, especially when we start to talk about the sections of the page and how we should be structuring our content here. So previously last week, when we just talked about divs and used classes and IDs for selectors of our div tags there, you could use a div and you could apply a class or an ID as a header. But when you start getting used to doing more, kind of think about the areas of your page and how you want to structure that with HTML, you should using what's called more semantic tags that the name implies what it is. So you actually have, for the top here, we have a header tag. And then we also have footer tags. So that would be good for the footer elements. I also have here a gallery. I could also label this as a section, which is really good for specifying a semantic tag that describes that this is a section on my page, like my gallery section. You can still give your semantic tags, you know, classes or IDs. That's a good thing to have. But you should start using tags along with div tags that actually imply what the tag is based on the name. Okay, so it actually, what the meaning is implied in the name. Because, you know, when you start working on pages, you'll have like a ton of div tags on the page, and that could start to get kind of hard to read. So this makes the page a little bit easier to read if you start using some more semantic tags. So what Miranda also played with looking at the code, she was using the figure tag, which is another semantic tag that's good for putting images inside of, so you know exactly when you're working with a tag that should be just work with an image, you could use a figure tag. So she also played with that, so that's good. All right, so let me kind of start with the gallery page here. Let me also fix some of my CSS. I think I don't need to switch on my CSS that much here. I think it's good. So I basically have a container. I'm continuing on where I have my container wrapped around my header, and then I have a section tag that's holding my gallery page, right? These could also be div tags too, like I said. But I'm just going to have just 2 boxes that basically kind of have it. Now, I do need to change my CSS a little bit here because I think I need, let me double check my CSS. Oh, my gallery here. Let me do my content. Let me do my header. Ooh, let me change that to a header tag. That's what demo said. It used to be a header class. There, so I have my title on the top of the page here. All right, I'm also not going to get too fancy with it. I actually liked what Kyle and Miranda did. I think for your pages, you really played and pushed the CSS styling of it. For time purposes, I'm not going to be spending too much time styling the header, styling each box here. Really just want to get this really just be functional and get it working. And I think up to this point, everybody should really have a good understanding of what some of the CSS properties and rules you could use, or properties and values you could use, the rules you can make to get your styling to work. And I want you guys to continue to play with that. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do, if I'm gonna get an image on this page, first thing I do, I need to think about a box that's gonna hold my my image. Okay. So what you could do here is you could either use a div tag or you could also use just a figure tag. So it's up to you. Do you want to use like a div tag that kind of holds maybe a div called like a photo, which maybe I'll let me do that. like I said, there's a couple different ways to do this. You could be more minimal about the tags you use, or you could be very specific about it. So what I'm just going to make a div tag that has a class of a photo, and all of my photos could share the exact same class. So let me hold that. This is going to be my first box. That's going to hold my first photo. Next thing is then let me put a tag to hold my image. Right? So I'm going to use a figure tag. That's going to hold my image. Now there are two ways to put an image into a page. You can use the image tag, so that's the img tag, or you could use background, the background property in CSS, do background-image, or just the background if you do the shorthand, and you could just specify that as a background image. Now in this exercise this week, I want you guys just to try to use just the image tag. If you guys want to experiment with the background tag, or the background-image, I'm sorry, not the background tag, the background property, or background-image, please do, just try it out, right? I will be talking more about doing background images as part of a page design, page layout, doing like background elements for boxes or for the entire page. I will be talking about that later when we talk about overall page design. So you don't have to really worry about that right now. I will be covering that and give you some more material about that. But I first want you to play with just the image tag, just so you get a feel of putting an image onto the page. All right, so I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to do img. So the attribute that we use to describe our image is our source tag. Let me kind of zoom into this a little bit here. Right, so you use the source attribute inside of our image tag to describe where the file is located on your, like, relative to your the file that you're at. So my file is an index file, right? That's the first file of my website or web page that I'm working on right now. And so in my source attribute, that's where I specify the location for the image. Now, since my images, this is really, really important. I think this is where Miranda, you kind of got a little tripped up a little bit and had questions about, again, linking out to the image. You actually did the image tag correctly, even though I don't think you were using the image folder, but you actually did the correct source for the image tag. You want to make sure that you are listing correctly the location of your image. So since my images are inside of an image folder, I have to make sure I reference that. Okay, so I say the folder name / the file name. Okay, and actually, let me save these here. I'm going to actually rename these photos real quickly here. I'll just call this photo 1 and photo 2. I actually had the original images that I got from Google Images here. So I'm just going to rename those, make it much more easier to see. So you want to make sure you reference the folder that's relative to the file you're in. So I'm editing the index file right now. Okay. So if I want to link to my image or put my image inside my web page now, I need to reference first the image directory and then the photo that's inside the directory. This is what's called making a relative link. Okay, and when you make relative links, it's compatible if you're working on your desktop or when you upload up to NC Web Space. Okay, so if you use relative links and try to keep them simple and short, it'll just work out. Now, if you try to link directly off of your desktop and say my desktop / the folder in a project folder name / just doing it that way, once you upload, it may work on your desktop, but once you upload it up to the NC Web Space, it won't work. So that will be an issue you kind of have to deal with. So I recommend using relative links, especially when you're first getting started. You can use absolute links for certain things, like once we get a little bit more advanced, we know how to create those absolute links, especially from a dynamic. We actually talk about this with WordPress in the future in the advanced website design class. But for now, when you're first structuring your images and trying to place them inside of your web page, you want to be making sure you're making relative links. So relative links looks like this. So you want to go to your source attribute and you specify first the folder name / what the actual name of the file name is, and you type the complete file name. Okay, so it looks just like that. Now, like I said, if you had your images next to your actual web page, which I don't recommend you do, you would just specify just the file name, right? So, like I said, I want you guys to put all of your images inside of an image folder. That's really, really important. You want to put it like this, okay? So that at least allows me to link and to display or have my image should be in my page now. So let me go to my web page. So now I have my image displayed, okay, in one big box. Now, let me do this again. Let me actually get my other image in here already next to it. So what I recommend, when you're first starting off, just start off with like 2 or 3 images, okay? Once you get one displaying on your page, like I have now it's not sized correctly. It's not for that, so it's really large. It's default size. I had that issue, which I'm going to actually give you a little trick to kind of fix this with the CSS. But just to kind of just really illustrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in 2 images already next side by side, and we'll see how they display. So once I know I have this working, I'm basically going to copy this and just paste my whole div tag that holds my figure tag and then my image tag. So now I'm going to change my image name, and now then I should have 2 images on my page, and so they're stacking on top of each other. Okay, so this is the default layout of how it's going to work by default, because remember, our div tags are meant to be block tags, right? They display as a block, so that number one will take up 100% width of the boxes inside. This is what I talked about last week. Unless we overwrite that functionality with CSS, and we have to think about that. Think about how big do we want each of our photo boxes to be, and then we can control how they're laid out. So let me kind of start styling this. Go to my style sheet. I know that I have inside of my, here, I'm gonna actually clean up my CSS here. I don't need the content anymore because I'm not using that. So let me kind of get rid of my content. Don't need that. I'll keep my header in the container for now. All right, so let me write since I have a class for a photo, use .photo. First thing, you know how I like to use borders. I love to use borders just so I can start to visualize and see this. So let me put a border of 1 pixel. Actually, I'll make it a little bit bigger here. We'll just do 3 pixels, solid and red, just so I can kind of see that border on the page. So I can see how that image is put inside of that box here. So that's the first thing I'm gonna do. I want to visualize that so I can see how it's inside that box. Well, now let me kind of control the size of that box. So let me do another thing. I'll do a here, if I'm going to be specific about this, we could do like a max. You can do max height or height, but I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to do height of, actually, we'll do width. We'll do width first. We'll do width of, we'll do 300 pixels. And I'll do height auto. Because what this little trick doing, I'm just going to say, okay, I want, I want to do, since I want to maybe be, actually, I'll do height auto for the image. We'll just do 300 by 300. We'll keep it simple like that. Okay, a nice kind of square box, 300 by 300 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. All right, so I have now changes where I can see the box, the outline of the box, but now the image is still overlapping it, okay? So that's going to happen because I really have, in my CSS, I'm not controlling the size of my image, okay? So now, let me show you a real quick trick that I recommend everybody try to do. This is something I talk about in the web animation course, talk about in the advanced website design course. If you take me for those courses, you'll hear me talk about this over and over again, because knowing how to size images inside of boxes is really, really super powerful. It's a great trick to have because it'll, especially if you optimize your images beforehand, you keep your file size small, you don't have to go back to Photoshop to resize your images. You can just resize them with CSS. Now, this wouldn't be a good technique that I'm going to show you for really super large images like I talked about, like if you have 4,000 or 6,000 wide, or if you have like a 10 megabyte, 5 megabyte image that's not optimized, this trick should not be done. You should probably definitely optimize this image separately. So you want to make sure you do that step first. Let's say I have a small image, it's still a large image wide, but I want to scale it, I want to size it inside the box. And you can do that with CSS. So what I'm going to do, you go inside of here, I'm going to use my figure tag. So since I'm using my figure tag, right, I'm going to select my figure tag. I know I have an image tag inside my figure tag. So what I could do now is say, okay, let me size my image that's inside of my figure tag to kind of fit that box. So what I'm going to do is say width, do 100%, and I'll do height auto. We'll see what it works. All right, so what that's doing, I'm saying, okay, I want the width to be defined to whatever box it's inside of. So my box, my overarching box is my photo, right? My photos, that has that width of 300 pixels. So now what I want to do is I want to say I want my image inside that photo box to then be 100% of that box. And I just want the height just to kind of auto height it. So I don't really have to be specific about the height. I can just say height auto, and it'll auto size it. Right? So it looks like, let me refresh the size here. So it looks like, yep, looks like it did it. All right, so now it's sized into it. Now you'll see here, I do have a little bit of formatting I have to kind of work with and do, because with the figure tag, it may have to, it's already kind of giving me a little bit of a margin spacing. But I'm thinking, let me also kind of don't mind if I'm trying to think. Let me first, here, before I actually size it, so that kind of worked. Before I even start getting, I want to make this image look a little bit better inside this box, but let me first do the next step now. let me work on the layout of these boxes. Okay, so let me go to back to my CSS and take it. So I know my photo boxes are sized now. They have a width and height. I can see with the border, right? But they're stacking on top of each other. That stacking is going to happen by default with block tags. Now you need to think about, okay, how can I get these to be laid out next to each other? So the first thing you should be thinking about is by using a container tag. I'm sorry, not a container tag. Is by using a float property. So you want to specify float as a property. And I would say, usually what I do, I like to float things left. That's usually what that will do, is usually start with like a left alignment. Now you can also float things right, and there are some times you might want to do that. But I recommend when you're first starting off, just think about floating your boxes to the left. Okay. Now the way the float property works is it's going to work if you have a defined width and height. Okay. If you do not have a defined width or height, the float tag or the float property will not work on a CSS rule. Okay. So you need to make sure you have a width and height set, then use a float. And then what's going to happen, instead of being stacked on top of each other, it's going to be aligned next to each other because they're all going to be kind of floated to the left next to each other. Okay. So let me save that, test this out, refresh it. So now I have my box now floating now left to each other. Okay. So now it's kind of working a little bit better. Now let me kind of just do, I'm kind of liking it, but since my images, now they're super tight next to each other, and that's okay. Like, so you can see, since I'm using the figure tag, the figure tag has given me some properties. You might also want to do, we kind of, since we're dealing with CSS layout, one thing it's really helpful to know how to do is to inspect the page, and it kind of can see what the CSS is doing. Because if you start seeing something happen, like I said, there's some margins of some padding that's happening here. Let me inspect the page and kind of see what is happening here. So I'm going to do inside of Chrome. You can also do this in Chrome, Firefox, Safari. If you right click and say inspect, what that'll do, that'll bring up the inspector tools. Okay, so let me kind of reset. So the way inspector tools, and like I said, I'm not going to go over everything about these tools, and you'll see me reference this later in class too. But what this first does, this allows you to kind of see the HTML of the page and also the CSS that's controlling the display of the page in these two kind of boxes over here. The one thing what I'm using this for now, I'm not really going to mess with this too much, but I do want to see one thing. When I'm hovering over the different areas, see how it highlights there? So you can see how by default, my figure tag that I'm using has some margin built into it. Okay. So what you can do and that's just basically the browser just applying some natural margin to the figure tag. And this is a good thing to do, because what it can do is it kind of gives you some spacing by default around your images. Because if it didn't have this, your images, you start putting images next to each other, they start to really be tight. Okay. So it's naturally building in some margin into that. But so what I'm going to do is I want to kind of control that a little bit more. So I'm going to go down to my CSS, because it's kind of a little bit, maybe it's a little bit too much for me thinking. So let me go back to my CSS, go to my figure, make a rule for my figure tag. So I'm selecting that. Let me just say for now, I'm just going to do margin of, let's say 5 pixels. Let's see what happens. Okay, so once I did that, you'll see that now I have a much smaller margin going around it. Okay, so it's up to you. Do you want to do that? I just want to show you could overwrite that default property that's happening. So when you use a figure tag, it's naturally putting some margin around it. That's based on what the browser is doing, and when it sees a figure tag, how it's rendering that out. But with CSS, you can always overwrite that and always have some control of that. So if you want to control and specify the name or specify the property of your that figure tag in the margin, you can always do that. Okay, and to figure that out too, like I said, I use the inspector, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about that right now, because the inspector has a lot of different features. But the one thing I do like to use, especially initially, is when you hover over the HTML over to the right here, is that it'll show you exactly, it'll give you almost a color highlight of what you're actually highlighting over. And when you see the orange areas, that's like a margin or padding. When you see like a blue area, you're going to see that's the spaces that box is taking up. So it's a really kind of good way to kind of just test out to see where, to select things visually on the page. Now, you can see, we'll get into this a lot more when I deal with more kind of complex CSS. I'm going to use this to kind of test out some of the CSS. Not really going to do that right now, but you could also modify your CSS in line within the page. All right, so I think I'm working okay, but I want to still kind of fix this. I'm thinking I don't want to see my thumbnails. I didn't take the time in Photoshop to really kind of recrop these. So I didn't really recrop them to be all exact that proportion. Now, like I said, if you do that step, beforehand, it actually makes the display a lot easier, because then your images can be all basically exact same proportions from the width and height. And so even though you're scaling it 100% width and is shrinking it down, the proportion is still the same, so the line next to each other. But I don't like how this is kind of lining it. So I have my box here, they're lying next to each other. But I would kind of like they were kind of a little bit more the exact same size. So what I'm going to do, let me change my image, give myself a different property here. I'm just going to kind of quickly kind of modify this. I'm going to go back to my figure with the image tag. Let me see, with my width here, maybe what I'll do is I'll say my width is 100% of the box inside. Let me change this to 200, just see what it looks like. Refresh the page. Okay, so immediately now my image takes up a little bit more. Now maybe 200, maybe a little 200, maybe like 150%. But I'll keep it as 200. So it's a little bit, it's going over the box, but now it's at least it's kind of filling up that area a little bit more. Because now what I could do now is I can apply a little trick here. Is I could tell my box to hide everything that's outside the box. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my, let's say my figure. I can even do this in the figure tag. I can say overflow. Do overflow hidden. Refresh my page. Right, and then it automatically kind of hides it. Now I still have a little bit of let me see my figure tag, so it hides that. Why is the other one not getting hidden? Oh, it's just the thing, the size. The overflow hidden on the figure. Need to actually add. Maybe it'd be better to actually put that on top of the photo. Let me see what's the best way to put that there. That hides that. Let me see before. Did I not type figure right? I mean, I didn't do that right. Let me double check my HTML. Sometimes I make a little mistake if I type in HTML here. So figure. That's closed off. That's correct. Photo. Everything's closed off there. Alright, so I kind of like how it's fitting in that box. It's still taking up, I think once again, I'm kind of dealing with a proportion issue, but it's still kind of popping over the figure tag, even though the figure tag, probably because the figure tag is not, the height is defined on that. So what I'm going to do, since I have my height and width already defined on my photo rule, it's probably going to be better. I'm just going to put the overflow hidden. I'm going to put it on that box for my photo. Do that. Save that, just so I can see this work here. Alright, that works a little bit better. And I still have my image still working where it's still not. Let me go to maybe a little bit larger. Let me do width. Yeah, the height auto here. Let me actually. I think what's happening is that once again, since I did not take time to make the proportions of the image the exact same, I'm having a little bit issue where it's kind of it's still auto sizing it. The height's auto. It's scaling it. It's scaling the exact same percentage. But since my widths are different, it's just causing a little bit of a disconnect. So I don't have a nice little kind of I was hoping to kind of get that to become all aligned next to each other. So let me actually do something here. Let me actually do my height. Let me specify. Let me do my figure box. Let me do that. Let me specify height of my figure box of 300 pixels. Do that, and then let me do the overflow hidden. Let me move that back down to here, because I'm kind of doing this on the fly here. This is how I work in a class here, so do this as a live example here. Kind of get that to work. So it looks like it's working a little bit better. Still have this one image still kind of popping out. I want it to be a little bit cleaner over this. So let me do with border margin. Let me take away and see the margin is good there. Yeah, actually, Martin, take the size here. Let me take the size down to like 290. So that kind of can, yeah, I can kind of force it. Like I said, if I would have taken a little bit more time to recrop these images out, yeah, now they're starting to work a little bit better. See, now they're kind of like I'm just cropping them out, size them, scaling that up with the height, just reducing the height of that figure box. And I'm also telling my figure, I don't want my image to go past my figure. So the overflow property is really, really helpful, especially if you're displaying something inside of another box and it's kind of overlapping that box. If you just put overflow : hidden, it hides everything around that. So it actually solves a lot of problems for you. Right, so that kind of gets me a little bit better here, and I think I'm liking this. But let me go to, yeah, let me actually gonna do. So I like the margin on the figure. That kind of gives me a little bit of space. Maybe do a little bit more. I'm trying to just scale this up just a little bit more. Kind of like that a little better. That's scaling it good. All right, so it's not too bad. Probably, maybe I would even reduce the height of my photo just a little bit, maybe a 290. Right, that kind of gives me a little bit, it's cleaning up a little bit, and then once I'm happy with that, I can take away the border. That kind of size is good. So now what I did was I auto sized the images inside the boxes they're inside of, and with the specifying a width, a percentage width, and a height to auto, and then forcing the boxes that size with the figure tag and also with the photo tag to have a reduced size, so it automatically will reduce the size of my images, but also maybe do my image to be a little bit larger than the box, and then so it overflows it, but then I can hide that overflow, so it kind of gives me like a cropping effect. Okay, so I'm using a box sort of to crop the image that side. Now when you work with background images, this cropping effect, you can actually really play with this. So if I wanted to be very precise about this crop, let's say if I want to move this image around inside this box, like you could do with the crop tool and specify exact location, I could have a little bit more control over that with the background properties. But that's a little bit more detailed, and like I said, we'll get into talking about background images later. But just to have a quick way to sort of crop your images and display them inside the boxes, I think that would be it'd be a good thing to have. Something else to do. Let me see. I think it's kind of lonely here with a. I do not have a third image, but here we'll just kind of fake this a little bit here. We'll take this one image, put this next to it, just so I got 3 images next to each other. Make my web page look a little bit better. All right, so that's kind of works out good here. Now, the other thing you have to think about, like I said, I do recommend one thing that you'll see is you start to work with the float box. You see, as I start to resize this page here, that it's responsive. See how the images are starting to stack on top of each other, and the float gives you that response over the adaptive ability to start stacking these boxes on top of each other. Now, I wanted to show one more thing with the layout here. Since I'm using a container, let me go back to my style sheet and put a margin back, or I'm sorry, not a margin, a border back on that, just so I can at least see that border there. All right, so you see how my images, they are working. If I resize this page here, and they are starting to stack on top of each other. Once it hits that border, they start to stack on top of each other. But it's gonna, that float left will try, since I'm using width and height, it's gonna try to align those images next to each other until it hits a box that's smaller, and then starts to push those boxes underneath each other. So it gives you that kind of adaptive responsive feel to it. But if I want my image to kind of fill up this box a little bit more, since I'm using, well, you have 2 approaches. Either I could change my container width to be a little bit smaller, but let me, since I have a little bit more room to work with, let me just change, I think 325 for my width here. Just to give myself a little more space. I may also do like 350. See how far I can push that. That feels a little bit better here. So kind of see it's a little bit closer. Then if I reduce the size of it, you can feel that way. The other thing you can do too, which we could also try to get these images, like I say, we could size them probably with a percentage too. We could also try to do this too. We could try to do like a 32%. You can see that, how that could work. So not just specifying a pixel size. We'll see if that works a little better. We do like a 34%. Actually, if that's going to go over, it's going to start putting them on 33. It's probably still going to push it over. It's not going to. Oh, it works actually pretty good. So using a pixel percentage, that actually kind of less. Ooh, I have a little issue. Yeah, because it's scaling the boxes now from percentage. So I would have to, since I'm using a set height, I would also have to make sure that that's fixed too. So here, I'll just kind of show you some different ways to get this working a little bit better here. I think 350 pixels, that kind of does a pretty good job, kind of keeping the box. Now, we could also, if I wanted to, push these boxes, since these boxes are, let me take a look at this too. So these boxes, since these boxes are all in a section, here, let me do that. Let me put my section, kind of rambling a little bit here, but I think, so this is the way I do my classes on campus here. I kind of like want to experiment a little bit with you. Let me take my section. I mean, once again, let me do a border, 1 pixel. 2 pixel solid, green. No, actually, we're in green because it'll cause an issue. We'll do blue. So I want to see the box for the section. Tag there. All right, so I need to define my section. My section doesn't have the height, so I don't have a section defined for my height, and it's not taking, since I'm using the positioning, it's not filling the box here. But let me do one other thing too. I'm curious. If I did my section, I said I want my section to be, let's say, my width of, let's do like 95%, and do margin 0 auto. We'll do height auto. Let me see, do that. Probably, it's starting to work, but I need to get a little bit more. We'll do my width of 90%. Oh, because it needs a little bit more space. I don't know if that's 90%. Let's see if that works. We'll start wrapping a little bit. So that'll kind of like push it like a little bit in the center. So that's kind of works. So there are different techniques to start to push that content in the center. We could also try to center align the tags, but this is kind of giving me like a basic layout that I want. So kind of playing with the widths, playing with the getting the boxes to kind of float next to each other. Kind of liking it so far. So we take away. Let me stop rambling here. This is, like I said, this is the experience you have if you're on with an on-campus class with me, as we're kind of working through something together. I usually like to do my demos where I do not prep them too much beforehand, in a sense, where I know what we're going to be doing, but I like to kind of do it on the fly. So if I run into an issue, I like for you to see me experience that issue and see how I can kind of work my way out of it and kind of figure out what's the best method to use or to resolve the issue that we're having. So like I said, I kind of like to experience these things with you, so it allows me to kind of experiment. So we do one more thing, then we're going to end this video out here and to finish this off, because I know this is taking much longer, but hopefully you guys, all the content I'm going over tonight is valuable to you guys going forward, because like I said, this is a really important week going into your first project, your midterm project here. So let me do one last thing to then linking to the image. Now, like I said, usually photo galleries and more advanced photo galleries or modern photo galleries, you would click on this image and then it would be displayed in like a nice kind of light box or shadow box, and like a photo gallery kind of effect where you can see the image overlaid over top of the page. That is actually something we do in the advanced class. We talk about how to do that type of effect in a photo gallery, but that takes a little bit of JavaScript. And JavaScript is not something that, well, something we're going to touch on to a very tiny bit just to introduce it to you in the intro in this class, but we're not going to really be doing any programming with JavaScript. Just kind of show you if you just want to get just something working with jQuery, just how you can put that into your page, just really something simple. But we talk about how to do a little bit more complex JavaScript to give you that effect, that kind of photo, kind of gallery, light shadow box effect. We talk about how to do that in the advanced class. But what I want you to do this week is just experiment with linking to the full-size image and having that open up into a new window or even the same window and kind of see how that works. So let me kind of do that now. Go to my web page here. Let me go to my figure tag. So what I want you to do is I want you to put in a link, and you could do this around the figure, you could do this around the image tag, or you can, honestly, if you want to do even the even around the div tag with the class of photo. But I do recommend when you're doing your links, try to keep your link tags as close to what you actually want to link to. So if I just want to link an image, put the link tag around the image. Well, maybe if that image also includes some piece of text, you could wrap it around both. Or if you just link some text, just put it around the text. So I recommend don't put your link tags around big groups of tags, because it can start to get a little bit messy, especially if you forget like the closing link tag. That can really be messy. So you want to make sure, I recommend putting your anchor tag, or what I call like the link tag, to kind of link to something. You want to make sure you put your anchor tag as close to what you want to actually create that link on, so you don't keep it as clean as possible. So I'm going to put an anchor tag. So href. Remember the href attribute that describes the location where you're going to. And then before I put the location, let me just make sure I have my tag wrapped around my image, right? So it's starting tags before my image. Then it's after my image. So let me actually do this a little bit cleaner here. Let me fix the indenting so I know exactly my closing A tag and then my beginning A tag, my anchor tag, is before my image, right? So you can see it's wrapped around my image. Now what I can do is I can just link basically to the exact same image. I'm going to say images / photo -1. Right, let me refresh the page. Click on the image, and it displays it. And actually, it's nice too. This version of Chrome, the new version of Chrome, which they didn't used to do this in previous versions, is now it actually gives you kind of a nice kind of almost like if you're just displaying just an image, it actually pops it into a nice kind of black window, black background window. It actually works really nice in Chrome. I'm not sure if actually Safari does it this way, but it actually presents the image with this nice kind of black background, so it makes it much more visible. But we can see here, you can see the URL that it went to. In the top in your URL bar, it goes directly to that image. So it's not viewing your web page anymore, or your photo gallery page. Is actually viewing just that image. right? And so if you want to go back, you have to click the back button to actually go back to actually see the image, right? Now, another thing you can do is you can play with the target when you're creating. Let's say if you want to link to an image, but you want to target it so it links inside of a new window or new tab. What you can do, you can specify the target attribute. And so one of the common target attributes you want to learn is the underscore blank. What that does, it forces the link that you're linking to. Oh, let me put that in the wrong place there. Sorry about that. You want to put that in the anchor tag. It tells that link, that anchor, to go and link to an image or page, wherever you're trying to link to, into a new tab or new browser window, depending upon how the browser is set up. So if I go back to my page now, click on my image now, and I can see it opens up into a separate tab. Now I can have two tabs. I can have my photo gallery tab and then my image tab, so I can always go back to it. Now, there are some discussions in the web design community that, using the target attribute is not good usability because it actually takes the user out of into a new tab, into a different experience, pops up. Also, the browser could pop up a whole new window, so it could be a bad user experience. And there are cases I do really, really agree with this. But when you're first starting to learn out and you're just starting to learn how to, let's say, link to an image and you want to display it as a new window or new tab, I do feel it's valuable to understand this target attribute because it definitely can solve a lot of issues where you just need to link to something. It's actually really super helpful, I find, for PDFs. Like if you're linking to a PDF file, I find you really want to link that into like a new window rather than have it keep in the same window, because a PDF, how the browser renders a PDF with the plugin and everything, that can be a little bit different. So I always, when I do PDF links, I always link to them outside to an external window. Images, like I said, web designers have views where like you shouldn't really be doing this, and like I said, that's why we have the inline kind of shadow box effects you can do now with photo galleries with JavaScript. But just getting started, I want you guys to try out the target attribute because it does give you a different way to link to an image, display into a new window or new tab, and then gives you kind of a new way to view it. So try that out. All right, so I'm not going to link every image because I'm hoping you guys get the drift of what I'm trying to show you here. So the next step would be I would start adding this anchor tag to each image and also building out my other rows. Okay, so right now I have basically, based on my widths of my photos, I'm basically defining my rows as basically 3 photos. That's what I want you to do. We could go a little bit more in depth with this, where I could actually do div tags that are define a div and a class of row, and I could actually be very, very specific about each one of my rows. But why don't you try this first step here? Why don't you just have one section tag or one div tag that kind of holds all your photos together. Play with the widths of your photos with the CSS and with the float property, and just see how they line up next to each other. If you have smaller images, you could actually fit 4 in a line or 5 in a line, right? But you want to play with the width of the page, play with the width property of that photo class, so you can constrain the box and then constrain the image size within that box. Play with those things so you can kind of see how they get laid out together. Because like I said, if you can understand how these images are working inside the box and how it's constrained to the box size, then it opens up the door for really kind of spending more time thinking about responsive and adaptive design, which is a modern web designer. You need to make sure your pages adapt to different device sizes. So it becomes really, really important to understand that. But I think that if you can just understand how to control these boxes with a float property and a width and a height property, it really goes a long way into understanding how to lay out your content with CSS and structuring your content the right way with the HTML. All right, so I'm sorry.